Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Linda Salant is a returning guest on our show. Check out her first two appearances on episode 120 and 126 of Boundless Body Radio, with the latter of the two featuring one of the very best carnivore diets beginner guides that we have ever done on this show. Linda Salant, also known as the Carnitarian on Instagram, has been on a carnivore diet for over 9 years now. She has leveraged a meat-heavy diet to reverse a wide array of health issues, including lipedema, amenorrhea, PCOS, anxiety, migraines, and whole body pain. She is now a carnivore coach and a stalwart advocate for a meat-based diet. She is a member of the Savory Institute, whose mission is to facilitate the large-scale regeneration of the world's grasslands and the livelihood of their inhabitants through a holistic movement. Linda has over 50,000 followers on Instagram, where she shares her knowledge, delicious photos of incredible carnivore meals, they really do look amazing, and tons of tips and tricks that are incredibly helpful and practical. She is also a competitive ballroom dancer and a mother of two. You can find her on Instagram at The Carnitarian or on her website at www.thecarnitarian.com. Linda Salant, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you so much, Casey. I love talking to you, and I really do appreciate you having me back on. Thank you.
I love chatting with you. I cannot believe it's been 3 years since we've had you back on the show. That's a long time. We've been exchanging messages since then and usually have a joke or two passed back and forth between the two of us. It's been a long time.
That's a really long time. Wow. So how you been, man?
Yeah, I've been really great. You look awesome as well. Happy as ever. I love following your account on Instagram and seeing all the delicious photos and you doing dancing all over the place. And it's just super cool. And I do have to say, we mentioned episode 126. That was a kind of a beginner's guide to carnivore. I went back and listened to that again. I've listened to that episode several times. I went back and listened again in preparation for this conversation. Not to toot our own horns here, but I have to say, I think we did a pretty good job, and I will stand by pretty much anything that we said in that episode. I would recommend anybody go back and check that out. So we did okay.
Isn't that great? Oh, that's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, it's great when what you say does not need to change because you said the wrong things. I'm glad we're sort of like staying consistent with the message.
Yeah, definitely. I was trying to think like, okay, am I just not changing my mind as much about stuff or not considering other things? Or did we do a pretty reasonable job? And I think we did a reasonable job. So kudos to you.
Excellent. Oh, same to you. That's great. Good to hear it.
So let's get an update with you. It's been 3 years. We talked last time about your own personal story and how you found the carnivore diet and all of that. Like, where are you today as far as your eating? Are you still carnivore? Is it still something you preach and practice and coach? Where are you at with all that stuff today?
Yeah, so absolutely, I'm still carnivore. I think some people would probably want to argue some nitty-gritty points with me because I put tomato paste and stuff. I use seasonings, but I still consider myself carnivore. It's been 9 years, like you said. And I'm very happy doing it. I'm very happy sharing about it. And it's working out really well for me. I've seen some really nice improvements in what I had wanted to work on. I'm sort of like the slow and steady approach to stuff, right? And like when I say like I'm working on body comp, I'm in it for the long run. And so it has been a slow process. But I have been trending in a great direction for quite some time now. And we can talk about how I deviated off plan. Things went sour for a bit, but now I'm back on and even better. So yeah, I'm sticking with it. Things are going well. I see no reason to go back to any other way of eating. And I'm doing coaching like I was before when we spoke, helping people understand that, high protein, meat-based diet, carnivore diet especially, is just great for overall health. And, helping people become comfortable with that, helping people understand what's an appropriate amount to eat, and other sort of lifestyle factors that go into reaching their goals. So yeah, I'm still in it to win it.
That's awesome. That's really great to hear. Since we're kind of here, I do want to go back and review your personal story and your journey along the way and things that you fixed. I love that you're taking the approach of doing things very long-term and very gradual. I wonder if we can comment on that kind of state of something that you mentioned, like the carnivore that uses a bit of tomato paste or the level of strictness to say that you're a carnivore or not a carnivore. I've been talking more about this because I'm finding more and more of this in the community, that there seems to be like you have to define your level of carnivory or something, where I always just thought of the animal definition of carnivore is you're eating primarily animal products, and little things might sneak in. Some people might be more strict or less strict. To me, I never really got worked up about whether somebody was perfectly strict or not. So my first question is, do you think we're getting stuck in the weeds as a community as far as like trying to, take away somebody's carnivore card for eating a sliver of avocado or including, other plant foods in the diet? And secondly, I wonder what you think about, kind of the squabbling that seems to be going on when it comes to those really small percentages, when we seem to agree about so many things, but maybe have differences of opinions in other things. What are you observing as far as that goes?
So what I think is yes, generally we don't need to pull anybody's carnivore card for adding in things like avocado. I think it does a disservice. So true, avocado is not carnivore. So if you want to say I am a strict carnivore, then maybe you have to qualify it and you have to say, but sometimes I eat avocado and sometimes I eat onion and I like a little paprika, whatever it is, you feel the need to say that. But where I think the disservice there is that not everybody comes to carnivore with an autoimmune disease or a leaky gut or some kind of skin condition that they're trying to heal, right? Or Lyme disease or something where they've got to be so strict. They come to carnivore for health benefits like that I found. They come for, some weight loss and some health benefits sort of jump on board with that, right? And then you can do that with like what I call 99% carnivore. Now, there are people out there that have other reasons for coming to carnivore that will say 99% carnivore is torture. Like 100% is where you need to be. Because if you're coming from a place of, like, say, food addiction, sugar addiction, and you try to be 99% carnivore, except sneak in a piece of cake at, even if it's once a month at a party or at an event or a social gathering, or, have a margarita once a month, that is torture and for that person. And so 100% carnivore is going to do it. But if it's going to be what they want. But for the other people who come to carnivore looking for some body recomposition, looking to gain some muscle, lose some fat, get rid of some headaches, normalize their periods, just give themselves nutrient dense food. If we make them be so strict that it becomes unsustainable for them, where they say, I can't do carnivore because sometimes I like avocado, or sometimes I just feel like having some lettuce. Then what happens is we push them to the outside. They feel as though, well, it didn't work for me. I may as well go back to like chips and pizza. And I don't think that's quite nice. So you can use the definition of carnivore, zero carb carnivore, or the original that what I learned from did include spices. But something like the Lion diet, which is very strict, is like meat and salt and water. I think people now are sort of saying that's real carnivore. That's what you've got to do. And I just don't think that that's what you've got to do for everybody. Like, sure, for some people, absolutely, that's what you've got to do. But that is the strictest, call it level 1 carnivore. And some people can fall into level 2, add dairy, all the way through to like level 4, where they're okay if the ribs that they're eating have been sauced in the smoker and then they order them without sauce on top, but that little bit of sauce in the smoker isn't going to affect them. And I think that that's absolutely still okay. Because if you are finding the health improvements with your version of carnivore, I'm not going to pull your carnivore card. And I don't think that we should be squabbling over something like that. It doesn't make sense to say you're not carnivore because you put that chopped onion in your tuna salad. Like, come on. Nobody went wrong with a little bit of chopped onion. That's not what got anybody in the boat that they're trying to get out of. So those little things, like I like to use tomato paste and I do some Italian style things with tomato, and it works for me. It's fine for me. I'm still on my carnivore journey with my tomato, and I know some people do it with onion and they get a lot of crap for it, and it just seems very silly to argue about some onion or some tomato,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Both of us at this point have had several years of experience in coaching other people. So I'm just going to ask this question, like observationally, what have you observed? And I would say, like with the people that I've coached, I can probably think of the number of people that I've worked with over the years that are still are literally, truly, very much strict carnivore. And that number is pretty darn low. Like when you think of all the people that you have coached through a carnivore diet, how many of them, again, by necessity, they have to be there, they want to be there, are 100% strict, and they are strict all the time? Is that a very big number or a pretty small number?
No, it's not a big number at all. In fact, I can't think of a client who has ever just done beef salt and water or ruminant animal salt and water. Because the vast majority of people are just like regular people. They're not on this extreme that we see on social media like Instagram, where it makes, I mean, practically it makes good content to be extreme, right? To be the strictest of carnivore and say you cannot have anything. It's pretty good content. It's a compelling story. And that's just not everybody's reality. I think people are less focused on nutrition than the people who are yelling about nutrition online, including myself. They just want to feel better. They don't want to talk about, I'm the strictest carnivore in the land. They just want to feel better and get on with their life and play with their kids. And, so the clients that I see range from, doing what I do, like where you've got spices and a little bit of sauce. It's all, and then they go straight through up to like low carb, where they're still eating vegetables and salads and, more than I would do. So very few people I find can sustain a very strict carnivore diet. Um, what happens too is I see in the space, and maybe you've seen this, a lot of carnivores who, they talk about you have to be strict carnivore. All of a sudden, then they start talking about, I feel like I need a reset. I feel like I need a reset. Like, what do you need a reset from? Like, what happened? Like, what went wrong? Something went wrong. And if that strictness is causing you to sort of like fall off the wagon and dip into something, that you shouldn't have, then maybe that strictness isn't working for you. And a little bit more of a relaxed approach would keep you from falling off the wagon, dipping into 2 pounds of cheese and needing a reset,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. One other thing I wanted to ask you, I'm hearing about this more, not something that I'm observing. When I see long-term carnivore people, I'm observing people like yourself, people like Dr. Lisa Wiedemann or Dr. Canberry, Dr. Chafee. Like I see people who look incredibly healthy. They don't look like they have any nutrient deficiencies. If they do, I'm not observing how that's like manifesting in their lives. These are very happy, active, healthy people from what I can tell. There's some people that are saying if you go too strict for too long, you will have nutrient deficiencies. I'm still struggling to connect how that is manifesting. So in your own personal experience from things you've observed with other OG carnivores like you, and the group that you got into when you first got into this, are you noticing anything that's really manifesting as far as long-term health concerns, nutrient deficiencies, eating a carnivore diet?
No, I'm not. I'm not. I mean, the long-term carnivores, I don't believe that they're lying. And I do believe that they are just eating like, ribeyes. Like the Andersons, I do believe are just eating ribeyes. And there are people who swear by the fact that they don't need supplementation. They don't need to eat even liver for, nutrient density and to get the B12 and the things that they say might be lacking if you're just eating the meat without the liver. So even to that point, I think, no, I don't think that being strict carnivore is going to be detrimental to anybody. I do believe you can get everything you need from just meat, salt, and water.
I love chatting with you. I have to say, like, you make everything so simple and easy, and we get stuck in these little quarrels about folate deficiencies. And it's like, nah, you're missing the
Right.
point, or the spices or condiments and all these little things that we get so wrapped up in and then get so defensive about when it's like, no, like, get off of cereal and bread and stop eating pizza every day. Like, there's so many other things that would be such a bigger priority. So I love the way you make things so simple for people.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I try to stay level headed and I try to, keep the approach that everyone's coming from a different place. And so everybody is sort of going to need something different and not just based on like diet history, but based on like what their personal life is like and what their stress levels are like. And you just can't make everything so strict for people and you can't make it so complicated for people. And so simplifying, I try to do that, individually with people and just simplify and get a read on what they're comfortable with and then, set plans for them that I think that they'll be successful. And I do try to make it simple. There's just no need because you're always going to find somebody whose approach worked for them who wants to tell you that that's the best approach. And I've just never subscribed to that. Like the way I do carnivore is so different than the way other people do carnivore, just in terms of like basic macros, like I do high protein, I do lower fat. And when I say that, people freak out, but it works for me. And I would never say that's the way you have to do it. I say this is a way to do it. Some people have success on other ways, and I'll even coach other ways if it's appropriate for the person. Doesn't have to be complicated or lead to arguments. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we would agree on this point that we're really trying to get this message out to the mainstream and be as welcoming as possible. I want the listener to think like you can move in this direction and probably see a lot of benefits, regardless of how strict you want to be. But the more we get tangled up in these little things, the less inviting it is for people. And I think that's the big point, is to start to move in this direction and see some of the benefits. So I really appreciate the way that you approach that. As I mentioned earlier in episode 120, we heard about you and your own personal story. It's been 3 years. So let's go back and tell everybody how you were able to find a carnivore diet. And I think listening back on that episode, I think I really underappreciated quite a bit of suffering that you were going through. You didn't sound like you were having a great time with all the conditions that we mentioned in the introduction. And sounds like you had some suffering going on there.
I'm not a complainer. I don't like to complain. I firmly believe that when you sit in, and sit in and wallow in any kind of diagnosis or condition, it just makes everything worse. And I'm not saying we should ignore our problems, but I'm saying like if you start identifying with those problems and talking about them all the time, sometimes what you focus on grows. You know how they say what you focus on grows. And I really do believe that. And so I try not to complain very much. And before I found carnivore, same thing. I didn't really complain much about all the stuff that was going on. But yeah, like, I noticed in my 20s, like I was having a lot of joint pain and I was having trouble walking upstairs. Like in my early 20s, I was, searching for elevators, stuff like that. PCOS, like missed periods, like amenorrhea and irregular cycles, migraines every day. And then the swelling that comes along with lipedema and then, the chronic venous insufficiency. I have like issues, but you know what? Everybody's got issues. And so it was funny to me because these were all things like I was brought up in a house that basically was like your typical Gen X house, right? Where it's like, well, honey, that's the way the cookie crumbles. Like, deal with it. And you just deal with stuff and you don't, say, oh, poor me, somebody please help me. Like you figure it out. You just figure it out. And so I didn't complain much, but when I found carnivore, because I was just trying to lose a few pounds, I ended up like I think the first thing that went was the knee pain. And I was like, well, this feels really good. And I had experienced that prior to carnivore when I was doing a ketogenic version of Atkins diet, that induction. And so I was sort of like, okay, yeah, that's cool. Keto keeps my knees from hurting because carbohydrates made my knees hurt. Basically, that was the thing. And, I loved peanut M&Ms. And so it wasn't like I was ever a food addict and I was never overweight, but I was definitely eating, bread, cookies, whatever, eating the things like in moderation, but still eating the things. And carnivore really helped when I realized that I wasn't getting migraine headaches anymore. Like that's life changing. And a huge one was getting rid of oxalates through the carnivore diet, because that's not something that your standard Atkins, 2-week induction keto type of low carb diet does. It still keeps in a lot of low carb vegetables that are super high in oxalate. And so I was having a ton of bladder pain from interstitial cystitis, which is so painful. It feels like a bladder infection, but it's constant and antibiotics don't take care of it.
Wow.
And it's just constant. And so what happens is you're just uncomfortable all the time. I say uncomfortable, but I really mean like in horrific pain. And so there are tons of women walking around with all this pain. This is something that Sally Norton talks about and dealt with herself, which led her, she had additional oxalate issues, but this was one that led her to the institute, which, got her on the path of learning about oxalate. When that interstitial cystitis pain went away, I was like, oh, well, this is life changing, because what that helped with was depression and anxiety. Like it is so depressing to not be able to focus at all or to be canceling plans because you're in pain, so it's just extremely helpful. Things like the vein issues that I was having, it's just part of the swelling that for me comes along with carbohydrate, separate but correlated with lipedema are the vein issues. So I was really happy when I went back to my vein doctor. Like I had gone, like most people with venous insufficiency, they go and they have their veins stripped. So they do this ablation. And then you have to go back because smaller veins take up the flow that the larger veins, had going through them. And so you go through this cycle every 2 years, you go back and you've got these dysfunctional veins that sort of break down over time. So you end up going back and back again. And when I went back, it wasn't 2 years later, it was 7 years later. And he looked at my ultrasound and was like, I don't understand why you're here. There's nothing I can do. Your veins look great. And, I had just gone back to check because I was like, well, it's been far more than 2 years. And on the surface, I've got, like broken capillaries and stuff like that. But the deep vein stuff, everything was really healthy. And, when you can see the results like that in an ultrasound, where things that he's like, I've never seen this before, where somebody who's really got this vein insufficiency does not progress in 7 years. So we chatted for about an hour about the carnivore diet.
Wow.
And yeah. And so, he was like really happy about it. So that's improved. And like I said, all of these things I just thought I was just going to deal with forever. And I wasn't going to complain about it. It was just, something I was just living life, it was just absolutely fine. But life's sort of better now. So why go back?
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I'm so grateful that your doctor, not only asked about what you were doing, that he'd never seen it, but was also curious to learn about that. You see that so rarely, so seldomly.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He was really shocked and he was taking notes. He was just so confused. Like, how could you possibly be healthy without eating any vegetables? He was confused because, this is what they are trained in, is the food recommendations, the food pyramid, good carbs, vegetables, that should be the basis of your diet. Plant-based is the healthiest way to go. And so when somebody tells you they're doing the opposite and have the pyramid on its head, it's sort of like a unbelievable story.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was super interested. I was glad about that.
Great. Yeah. I'm glad about that too. It just seems like a lot of doctors don't think in that direction, like you said, but also do not have the curiosity, don't want to know about it, don't want to learn about it. So I really do appreciate that. One of my highlights of last year was going to KetoCon in Austin 2023. I got to meet Sally Norton in person. I can report back that she is an absolute angel in person, just like she is in all of her content.
Awesome.
And for her to barefoot step on stage at KetoCon and talk about oxalates and everybody's favorite beloved low carbohydrate foods and all of the almonds and almond flour and spinach, like, it was really, truly savage of her. And she did it in a very awesome and kind way. But I really appreciated that she was able to get up there and like really push that movement forward with, again, a group of people that love dark chocolate and, again, all the almonds and the chard and all that stuff. It was pretty great.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's brave. But you know what? You've got to have the goods to back that up. And she's got the goods to back that up. And not just in her information, not just in the literature. I mean, when you look at her, that is one badass woman. Like, she's killing it. She looks amazing. She is strong. And the things that she has healed just from cutting oxalate, it's pretty incredible. So she's got the goods to back that up.
Absolutely. Yes, I can confirm that. Confirm that in person. Okay. Last time we talked, we missed this. As we've been doing more and more content, I feel like this topic gets more attention. It's some of the highest viewed videos we've ever put on YouTube. It gets the most watches, most comments. And the same thing that I see is women in particular being so frustrated with this condition, lipedema. I really wanted to talk to you about this today. I'm so glad that there at least seems like there's a little bit more awareness now than there was in the past. But the number of women that come out and will write paragraphs on a YouTube video and say, like, I can relate to this woman. I suffered with this forever. Nothing made it better. Like, it seems uber frustrating. Tell us a little bit about lipedema. How did that come about in your own life, and what it is, and how that, again, kind of like, I don't know, manifest itself in you in your own personal life.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not a qualified lipedema expert, but I have lived with it for quite some time. It runs in my family. My sister deals with it, and, I deal with it. So basically, lipedema is an adipofascial disease, and it involves the adipose tissue, your fat tissue, and it involves the fascia, which would normally sort of surround the muscle and the fat layers, and be between them. But in lipedema, the fascia sort of becomes fibrotic and entangled with the fat and even with the muscle. And so with lipedema, that fat is so differently functioning than normal fat. And so people need to understand that it's not just an odd distribution. Some people think, well, if you've got a slim torso and you've got a pear shape, you've got lipedema. And that's not it. Like, that's not the extent. It goes way beyond that. So you may have that pear shape, but what's happening behind that and underneath the skin is all of this sort of fat dysfunction. And because it's dysfunctional fat, like I was reading a paper that there are 4,400 differences in the fat tissue that you can call out between normal adipose tissue and lipedema fat tissue.
Wow.
The signaling is different. It has a tendency to not release its fat stores in a way that normal fat would. There's angiogenesis there, the way that, normally we're familiar with that word in cancer cells, where they create their own lymphatic system and their own blood system to feed the cancer cells. Lipedema fat cells have a sort of a similar, like, genesis of like pathways that run between them, and it's this sort of tangled mess that it does not respond to diet and exercise the way normal fat does. It's just dysfunctional fat. And so the frustration that comes from the women, and it's like 1 in 10, it's a lot of women have this condition, and they're often dismissed by their doctors, and the doctors say, well, you just need to lose some weight. The frustration is in sort of in two parts. Like, first of all, there's pain, there's mobility issues, there's physical issues that come along with this fat. And so you'll see bruising in these women, and they'll say, I don't know how I got these bruises, or it will be their legs or the backs of their arms will be very sensitive to touch. So you'll put a blood pressure cuff on one of these women and they'll scream, and the doctor will be like, oh, stop being such a big baby. It's just a blood pressure cuff. But there's pain involved there that the doctor can't understand. And it's real. There's so much sensitivity. I remember, like, if you walk in a house and someone's dog like jumps on your thighs to say hi, that is excruciating. And it is so painful, like you want to scream, because it feels like you're being hit with like a crowbar. It doesn't feel like a sweet little dog. It's really painful. Um, I mean, so, what I'm dealing with and how I'm helping myself with that is in controlling the inflammation and the amount of fat cells that I create. So, like in regular people, you would have a set amount of fat cells, and if you overeat, you stuff those fat cells, and you may end up like a type 2 diabetic because your fat cells are sort of large and they become insensitive to insulin, and you get these symptoms of type 2 diabetes. In women with lipedema, they have different differentiation of the stem cells in their fat tissue, and they keep creating from those stem cells more fat cells. And so instead of a situation where if you overeat, you plump up your existing fat cells, we're in a situation where if we overeat, we gain more fat cells, and that will just keep on going. But because of the dysregulated signaling happening from those fat cells become unable to release their fat stores. And so losing weight becomes very hard. And there's this sort of vicious cycle of just growth. And that's why they say lipedema can only be resolved with liposuction, because according to the literature, there is no cure for this. There's only mitigation of symptoms and conservative measures like compression, cold therapy, manual lymphatic drainage, MLD. These are things that can help with being more comfortable, but they typically don't claim to help with size reduction. And so in my sort of slow and steady approach, what I've done is I've taken into account this idea of protein to energy ratio, right? And I've increased protein and I've decreased fat to a point where, for me, I'm comfortable. I'm not angsty because I'm too low fat, but I'm not giving my body any opportunity to turn surplus energy into fat cells or to stuff my fat cells. So it's a really fine line that I walk, but I find it very easy to do if I just focus on higher protein foods, because I'm just always erring on the side of too much protein versus too much fat. But keeping calories in check, which is something carnivores don't like to talk about. They say, calories don't matter. But for us, for lipedema, it really does matter. And, I've been able to lose leg fat, reduce my body fat percentage, even in the legs, which I never thought would be possible. I had thought for sure that ultimately I'm going to end up on the liposuction table, because that's the path, that's the path. And now it's becoming available under some insurance companies. And so there's a really strong push towards, go get the liposuction and you can get it covered. And it helps so many women. And these women's stories are, I felt terrible. I could hardly move. I was in a wheelchair, to now I can move. And so the liposuction solution is fantastic. I'm not a huge fan of surgery. And so I have always said, well, I'm going to just try as hard as I can to stay away from the liposuction. And I think if I keep going with the way I'm going, I won't need to do it. I've been able to reduce my fat instead of having it progress, but even just being able to maintain fat levels in lipedema legs is a really, really hard thing to do. My heart goes out to these women, and I talk with them all the time, especially now more than ever, and I try to like give them hope that you can do the conservative measures. You don't necessarily have to think like, I'm just going to get worse. And it's very, it's sort of like, it's embarrassing. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's sort of this point of like pride that women with lipedema get judged. And people say things like, you just need to be a little bit more strict with your diet. But the women that I talk to are all chronically under eating because they are so afraid of number one, getting bigger, and number two, of the judgment, especially in public. And I see women who I can tell they've got lipedema, and you would never want to walk up to a woman with lipedema and say, hey, by the way, did you like, I don't recommend anybody ever do that. But I can see that they've got lipedema, and I look at what they're eating, and it's always something super low calorie, and they are trying really hard because it's embarrassing, and it's something that they've probably been dealing with for a really long time. They've probably tried to get some help, and they've been shut down several times. A lot of doctors don't even believe that it's a real thing. And I'm so happy that there are more doctors talking about it in the last few years. But a lot of doctors in the past have argued against it being even a diagnosis.
Wow.
So finally it's a diagnosis. Finally, it's something that they're saying, you can talk to your doctor about, something that the doctors can bill for. So basically that's what that's all about. It's got a code so they can bill for the appointment. But prior to a few years ago, doctors would not discuss this. They didn't recognize it at all. And so I like to use a higher protein, lower fat carnivore approach. I think has helped me so much. But then there's also the components of like keeping stress low, making sure sleep is great, and things like that have managed it. And so, I'm feeling really good about it. And I hope that I can inspire other women to start feeling like a little bit hopeful that they're not destined to become those stage 4 pictures that they've all seen. Like when you look up lipedema, you see those stage 4 pictures and you think to yourself, this is my future. The doctor will confirm this is how it's going to go. And so hopefully I've seen people, there's one woman online who is just killing it. She had, I think it was stage 3 lipedema. And with like an anti-inflammatory diet, she is killing it. She's gotten the mass of her legs down to such an extent where if you saw her in, leggings, you wouldn't necessarily know that she's got lipedema. Whereas, maybe 5-6 years ago, you'd know for sure, no matter what she was wearing. So I'm hopeful, and I'm just going to keep on my path and hopefully help some other people do the same thing.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I love how you prefaced all of that by saying, I'm not an expert in this. And then you made this like very expertly explanation about the whole thing. I didn't know that about the liposuction. That's very interesting. I only tend to hear about the negative things that come with liposuction. Do you hear any kind of like side effects or downsides to that?
Well, liposuction in general, if it's not done correctly, has all sorts of like side effects like deformities. I've heard of, people just having lots of pain from liposuction that doesn't go away. And also you end up with, a not great looking result. If you have lymphatic issues and you go to a doctor who's not really careful about what they're doing, you can turn lipedema into lymphedema. Because if you mess with your lymphatic pathways while you're doing a liposuction, things get a lot worse. And that's really hard to reverse. Like if you're messing with lymphatics and you end up with scar tissue, lymphedema is really, really difficult. So also there's this point where people say, and I don't have experience with it, but some people say when you get liposuction in one area, your body tries to get back to its set point and you end up gaining fat in other areas. I haven't had any personal experience with that, obviously, but that's one thing that definitely is in the back of my head.
I've heard that as well, but I've never seen it either. So that's all very interesting. You mentioned a low inflammatory diet. Obviously, a carnivore diet is very low inflammation because you're eliminating everything that could possibly be. But what are some of the other priorities if somebody isn't going to do, super strict carnivore? What things should they be looking out for? Is it mostly just ultra processed foods, or are we talking about, again, things like oxalates and other plant toxins?
So it seems to be the two big heavy hitters are the carbohydrates and the seed oils. And that's just across the board for everything anyway. Like we know that processed foods are super highly inflammatory because of the refined carbohydrate. And seed oils are just super inflammatory and really do contribute to unhealthy fat cells. So, some people will say, I went on an anti-inflammatory diet, and so I cut out bread and candy and fried foods. Like, okay, that's a great idea. But like really what they're doing there is they're cutting out seed oils and they're cutting out processed foods and they're cutting out sugar. And so they're doing like a whole foods diet without saying that they're doing a whole foods diet. So I don't know that, you know, I don't know the science about oxalate and lipedema enough to say. I chatted with Sally once and she said there is a correlation between like unhealthy fat cells and oxalate. I don't know. I don't remember enough about it to speak about it. But a carnivore diet to me is really like the best anti-inflammatory diet.
Mm.
So, that I love that. But in reality, I don't think cucumbers are inflammatory, and I don't think, lettuce or avocado is inflammatory. So probably those things can be included, also.
Cool. No, that's great. I love that explanation. And it's nice. I hope it's hopeful for listeners to hear that and think like, okay, this isn't my life sentence. There are things I can do. Like you said, like even if it's just stop the progression, let alone make it get better, that's at least something. So I think that's very helpful. Another hot take you threw in there is the higher protein, not so high version or not so high fat version of a carnivore diet. This is again a bit of a hot take. See people out there who promote a carnivore diet and you see them eating like literally just chomping on butter all day and that kind of a thing. I'm firmly planted on the fence on this one, exactly 50-50. So tell us a little bit about your experience with, understanding that a carnivore diet should be high fat. You should eat fatty meat, which is the way you started, but then understanding like, wait a second, maybe this is a little bit too much of that energy component, like you said, and maybe not enough of the protein component.
Right. So what I like to do is I sort of say like, okay, well, what is the minimum, and then where is the maximum? And so I go and I will reference back to say what Maria and Craig Emmerich call out as a PSMF. That is the highest protein. That is a protein sparing modified fast. You would do this like for a day or 2 days in a week. And what is that? That would give you the protein that you need to repair cells and build muscle, and the fat that you need to have healthy hormones, but it's in place of like a water fast. So it's a very low calorie thing, but you've got to have this minimum of 30 grams of fat in order to still, maintain your hormone health. You would do that like once a day. So 30 is like, bare minimum of fat. That's like when you're like a bodybuilder and you go down to like, this fat-free diet and you're cutting like crazy, you go 30. But where is the maximum? Some people get up to, they're talking about 80% of their calories from fat in unlimited calories. You can be talking about 3,000 or 4,000 calories, and 80% of that coming from fat is a lot of fat. I mean, I don't have a calculator to do the math, but it's a lot of fat. For me, I did not enjoy protein sparing modified fast days. I don't do it. I find that for me, my minimum is like 80 grams of fat or 90 grams of fat. I'm even more comfortable. And that is enough for me I can tell like I'm not cranky, I'm not angsty, I don't have like anxiety, and I'm satisfied. And I fill in with protein to an extent where I'm at more like, instead of the zero point 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight, some people say per lean or some people say per total body weight. Instead of 0.8, I like a 1.5 grams of protein per pound of body weight is how it sort of works out for me. But it all comes from your energy expenditure, how big you are, how much mass you're moving during the day, right? We need a certain amount of calories to sort of live our lives. And if we are wanting to lose weight, calorie deficit still works. And that there's another point of argument where, for me and some other carnivores now, to start talking about calories matter is just huge, because we were always the opposite of calories in, calories out. We were like, no, it's about insulin. It's about keeping carbohydrates down, and then you won't have to worry about calories. What happens when you do that and you eat sticks of butter all day is you just run the risk of consuming too much energy for what you need. And so there were a lot of people who went down the sticks of butter or brown butter or nothing but, ribs, chunks of fat. They went down that route. And then all of a sudden they were like, I don't know what happened. I was doing high fat carnivore like always, and I gained 30 pounds. And it's like, no, you weren't doing it like always. You were really forcing the fat because it was trendy, and it's just too much fat when there are people out there that have that fat on their bodies to lose. So, not speaking about myself, but speaking generally, not people with lipedema, but general people with general overweight, they need dietary fat. They can get that fat from what they're eating, or they can get that fat from their bodies. Now, if you're consuming carbohydrate and dosing with carbohydrate all day long, you're not going to have access to that fat, right? But if you keep generally low insulin, you'll have access to that fat. But if you keep shuttling in fat, that fat has to get processed, it has to get stored. And so you will gain weight. So at this point now, I've seen in the last few months, people, actually, I'd say almost about a year, people now are sort of getting it. And it's thanks to, people like Maria, Ted Naiman, Vanessa Spina, Gabrielle Lyon, like talking about protein more and more, that people are understanding the importance of protein. And so what happens is the more protein you try and eat and the more you focus on protein, if you don't reduce the fat, your calories are just going to be like, crazy through the roof. If you're trying to pay attention and get to this 80%, and you want to have an appropriate amount of protein and still do 80-20, you're likely going to be over on calories for what you need. And so I think this is where people either they weren't paying attention to calories at all, or they were trying to have increased protein and increased fat and stay at this magical 80-20 ratio. And it's not working out. It did not work out for them. I'm hearing more and more stories every day of more and more people. And every time a post comes up that discusses how, things like feasting, priming, and then fasting is not such a great idea. You look at the comments under those posts, and there are stories of people like, who got really screwed by trying that approach. And so hopefully now people will sort of get their wits about them and understand that calories still matter. And sometimes the people talking about that calories don't matter are, number one, they're really large people, tall people. They're people who have not ever had metabolic issues. They're in great shape with large amounts of muscle mass. I mean, super large guys are talking about how calories don't matter, and that if you just eat until, satiety, you'll be fine. But these are people who are really great at, burning calories. And so for somebody who's half the size, like a small woman who's half the size of like a large, 6-foot man, things are going to work a little bit differently. You may not find satiety until you've actually overeaten, if you're trying to do high fat carnivore.
Got it.
So there we are.
Very well explained. I love how you explained that you can get your fat from your food, or you also have fat that's already on the body, and insulin is what hides it from us, so we can't access it, like you said. So as long as your insulin is low, you can't access your body fat, and your body will work it out and get it out, which is great. Last time you and I chatted, we talked a little bit about tracking, and we kind of decided as like a long-term practice, tracking was not the very best tool for most people. Sounds like in this case, at least short-term, that would be more helpful for somebody to know where I'm at. Is that kind of what you recommend?
I do recommend tracking, especially, yes, in the beginning and not for long term. If you can find a nice eating pattern that kind of works for you, you take the tracking information that you've done, but you have to do the work. You have to understand like what your portions should look like, what your foods should be, like what your meat cut selections should be, so that you get that point of satiety from the protein and the fat that you're eating. But then you learn from that and you say, well, if I stick within these rails, I don't need to track. So I have not tracked in a year and a half, but I'm still seeing progress because I've really just switched the types of food that I'm eating. When I was doing high fat, it was like ribeye niblets, which is just all the fat, like the tail included on the ribeye, chop that all up, fry it, eat that with the steak. I got tremendous benefits health wise from doing that, but I didn't see fat loss from that at all. And when I switched to a higher protein, where instead of doing ribeyes, eating, raw suet on top of that, eating butter on top of that, I saw results. I saw body fat percentage go down. The confirmation of the fact that it wasn't just a shift in time, but it was a shift in like the foods was when I went back to trying to do high fat because I thought in my head, like, well, everybody's doing more butter. I had to try brown butter. I had to get back into ketosis. Everyone was saying how important it was. And I got the voices in my head and I slipped back into that high fat thing. And you can see it sort of in my Instagram feed, how I went from high fat and then I did this protein thing and it was great. And then I slipped right back into high fat. And the DEXA showed I lost muscle mass and I increased body fat. And that's kind of like, for me, I feel like I've got some time to recover from that. But if you're, struggling, you're in your 60s, you're in your 70s, it's like, come on, like don't just get on with it. Like you don't need to waste time with messing with trendy things that are going to set you back. Like you're trying to, keep strong, and as we age, it becomes harder to sort of back out of our mistakes. And I see it with a lot of women, like, who are like in their 50s and their 60s. These are the ones who got truly affected by eating too much fat. And they're still working on trying to lose that. And it's been a huge setback for a lot of people.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so tracking in the short term, as you move more towards a long-term approach, you're kind of trying to be, more intuitive and listen to your body and see what it's telling you as far as where to go. You've already alluded to this quite a bit, but I just wanted to reiterate. What would you expect for somebody to be feeling that you would think, wow, this person needs to add more fat? And what things would somebody be saying where you would think like, wow, okay, this person needs to be eating less fat?
So okay, so first, if you are not tracking, then we've got to get a handle on how many calories you're eating because it might just be that you're eating just too much food, right? That's too much fat. And so that's an easy one, right? So you're eating too much fat because you're gaining weight because you're eating too many calories of fat. So fine. As far as percentages, it's to me that's for people who like once you get that slight calorie deficit, I like something like a 10% calorie deficit. You go into a TDEE calculator, you put in your stats, and it will tell you like just to be alive, here's how many calories that you burn during the day. And if you want to lose weight but maintain your muscle mass, here's how much protein you should be eating, and here's about where your calories should be. And that sets the quantity of fat. So then you go with that plan, you try that plan, and you see how you're doing. I love DEXA because it takes gravity out of the equation. A lot of people like to say, well, if I weigh less, I'm doing better. And when I eat more protein, I start to weigh more. But if you're gaining muscle mass or bone density, then you should be celebrating that weight gain, not be frustrated by it. So I like to tell people to go get that objective measurement. Even to tell people use a tape measure is difficult because sometimes you don't change in size. Sometimes your clothes don't start feeling better. But there are shifts going on inside of you that a DEXA can help you see that you are losing fat or you are gaining muscle. But symptom wise, if you're not eating enough fat, you're going to be hungry, or you're going to have like I found like a jitteriness, like just this angsty feeling, this unsatisfied feeling. Like I'm not like where I was like, nope, I'm still hungry. And like I was almost like jittery because I think, fat sort of has a calming effect on people. And I think sometimes people get stressed out and dive into a stick of butter because it has that calming effect. People love their sticks of butter. I think they sort of like it becomes like their happy thing, because sometimes eating a lot of fat can make you feel really good. And but if so, that's what I do. Basically, I get a starting point based on how much protein, because that's what I prioritize. And then we figure out if you're eating too much fat, it's usually bumping your calories beyond what your needs are.
Yeah. Well, I think
So that's what I do.
I think that's totally reasonable to use a calculator like that. It's not going to be precise, but you just use that as a starting point, and then you adjust as necessary to get to the results that you like. I think that's great. Practically, what does that look like for you? You mentioned ribeyes before. Does that mean you're eating less ribeyes now? Is it still a lot of red meat? Like, what is a diet now today for you versus, when it was before when you were higher fat?
Yeah. So I eat now a lot of Greek yogurt, a lot of non-fat Greek yogurt, which I love because it's a lot of protein without a lot of fat calories. I do Greek yogurt in the mornings sometimes. Or I'll just do protein coffee in the mornings, which is like a Equip protein. It's a beef-based protein powder. Put that in my coffee, and then I can go dance because I do the ballroom training, and I don't want to eat like a big meal before I go dance. So I typically will do a combination of yogurt and protein, or just the protein. And then, yes, the cuts are different. So instead of having like ribs and oxtail and ribeyes and short ribs, it's now like top sirloin steaks and tuna salad and salmon cakes that are super high protein, like with egg and salmon, or even ground beef. People will be surprised how lean ground beef actually is. So that's basically it. I do the cuts. Like most cuts, other than ribeye, are actually what carnivores would consider lean. And what's interesting, I'll tell you this: we argue about what is lean meat versus what is fatty meat. The other day, I did a poll, and it was just New York strip steak. New York strip steak was 38% protein and 62% fat. And I asked everybody, is this fatty meat? Is this lean meat? No wrong answers. And I shit you not, it came out 50-50 exactly. And so the people who argue that is too lean, no, that's too lean. And then people, that is too fatty. They're split right down the middle. And so what happens is now I hope that people are realizing that when they're arguing over fatty meat versus lean meat, they might not be even thinking of the same thing. Like they might not be referencing the same thing. And some people say you've got to have fatty meat at every meal. And then you look at what they're eating and they're having strip loin at every meal. But to somebody else, that's not fatty meat at every meal. So really, what are we talking about here? If you're seeing success because you eat strip loin at every meal, guess what? You're a high protein carnivore. You're not a high fat carnivore, as far as what the way people get on my case. So it's very interesting that there's no definition of what is fatty and what is not. And I don't think that there should be, because it's a subjective term. I don't think anybody should like take on defining what that is. It's a subjective term and it'll always be subjective. But if you're going to argue, you've got to eat the fatty meat and that's the only way that you're going to be healthy. It's like, well, what are you talking about specifically and why? Why does it make you healthy? And to tell somebody you've got to hit a percentage is so strange to me, because our bodies don't work on percentages, right? They work on like grams, quantities of nutrients and signaling that comes from fat and from protein. So I've been eating, just the leaner things, which to some people are the fatty things. It's fascinating. And when I tell somebody that all I eat is steak, They go, oh my God, that is loaded with fat. How do you eat that much fat? And, if I said to somebody, I have sirloin at every meal, somebody who's not in the carnivore space, I have sirloin at every meal and hamburgers at every meal. They'd be like, God, that's so much fat. When I say I've got hamburgers and sirloin at every meal to our community, they're like, God, that's so lean. How do you survive? It's really funny.
That's funny. Well, no, there's so much nuance to that because, like you mentioned, ground beef, and you don't realize that. Yeah, the fat might be in there when you start cooking it, but a lot of it renders out. I've had people, doing tracking with like brisket, and you think brisket is this big fatty thing until you trim it and then it's smoked, and then all of a sudden you lose all that fat. It's actually way leaner than a lot of people think it
That's
actually
right.
is. So
It is. It's incredible. And, even people like, especially something like a chuck roast, when you put a chuck roast in a crock pot and then you open that lid and there's all that fat on top, and you're like, look at me eating the fatty meat. Chuck roast is so lean, and there have been people who eat nothing but chuck roast and they go on about how they eat the fatty meat and fatty meat. And it's like, honey, you're eating pretty lean, like good for you. But like, let's not pretend that eating chuck roast or eating New York strip steak, people love picanha. Let's not pretend that that's the same as eating ribeye with all the fat and some butter on top. Like it's not the same. There's a difference there. You're going to get far less fat calories and far more protein satiety. You're going to be able to stay within your calorie limits for the day and feel great. You're going to lean out like perfectly. It's going to be wonderful. Uh, this is, and then people say, all you have to do is just eat the fatty meat. But in reality, sometimes they're not eating what you think they're eating. They're not eating ribeyes and butter.
Yep. That's such a great point. I love that. I like how you explained all that because you mentioned, yes, this is subjective. We'll give you targets and starting points. That gets a little tricky and murky with tracking. Let's try that in the beginning so you have an idea. But then also as a backup is like now you're paying attention to how you're feeling and you're going in the direction that's getting you the right results so that you can adjust that. Whatever's working this month may not even work next month. You may need to further adjust. But I think that's a great way to think about things. A lot of great practical tips and the foods to be eating. Can you believe we have been sitting here talking for over an hour?
I can't believe it. I could go on. You're just the best. You're
I
so easy
love
to
it.
talk to.
Oh, you're great. You have awesome information. And again, and it's a way it's simple and practical for people, which I absolutely love. Is there anything we've missed? Is there anything we need to go back and cover or anything that you'd like to talk about before we end this conversation?
One thing that I did talk about just briefly, and I want to talk about again, is just the stress aspect and just about not identifying with your diagnosis. This is so important. And I would like to start talking about this more, just in general, because I do think people tend to spiral when they start to identify with whatever it is that they're trying to heal. I found that with lipedema, if I go into the Facebook groups and I start thinking about it, I start having conversations daily with my husband about it, things get worse and it progresses. And so I just want to, for the end, just stress that if you're dealing with something, get some help, make a plan, and then just try to not be in a thought loop about how frustrated you are, how hard you're working, because that can be so counterproductive. So I find, I like to say stress less carnivore is the best thing, like stressing less. That mind body connection is so strong that if you can work on, stress mitigation techniques and things like sleep, it is so helpful. So to not identify with your diagnosis and don't get yourself in that tailspin where you think like I'm working so hard. This is not working. This is not working. I got to work harder. Just kind of sit with your plan and trust your process. If your process didn't work, reevaluate and tweak. But don't try and don't try to not be frustrated by it every day.
Yeah, that is great advice. I often kind of wonder about this as far as like diagnoses in the mental world. We're getting so much better with more sophisticated equipment at diagnosing different things and, take anything, but like maybe like cancer or something. When we're starting to tell more and more people that there's like trace amounts of cancer, is that really helping or is that making something worse? It's obviously something all of us need to take seriously, but at the same time, it's like, are we creating just more stress around all of these conditions where that's just not needed? I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting to think about. It's a really good point, because stress is a real killer, and, You hear the stories about people who are misdiagnosed and they are told that they have a condition and they become very sick.
Yep.
And then the doctor's like, oh, actually, you don't have that condition. So that mind body connection is really, really strong. It can do you in. Stress is a killer.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. Well, again, I think that's great advice and a great way to end this conversation. Linda, it was so great to catch up with you. Please, can we make the next time not be 3 years? Can we catch up a little bit sooner than 3 years next time we chat?
absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely. It's been so great to talk to you. I love it every time. I feel like I could talk for much longer. I appreciate your time. This has been great. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you and your time. And before we let you go, where would you like people to know where they can find you and connect with you and your work?
So I'm generally always on Instagram. That's my main social. You'll be able to find me on thecarnitarian.com. And there'll be links to my coaching there. And I would love to help anybody interested in, reaching their goals. So generally those two things. I've got a Facebook and I've got, like a threads and all that stuff, but really that's not where I'm hanging out. If you want to find me, message me on Instagram at the Carnitarian.
Excellent. We will link that in the show notes. And I think the listener will very much appreciate that you are excellent at coaching. You will give them really, really great advice. So highly encourage anybody to take you up on that offer and go to your Instagram and your website to check that out. But for now, Linda Salant, thank you so very much for everything that you do, for the journey you've been on, to be able to share that journey with us today in a way that's really simple and practical. It's just wonderful. So thank you so very much. And thank you for taking time to be on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio. Thank you so very much for listening to and supporting Boundless Body Radio. This podcast is such a passion of mine, one of my favorite parts about running our business, and none of this would be possible without our incredible guests and listeners like yourself. Thank you so very much for all of the amazing reviews that we get on Apple and Spotify. Trust me, we read them all, and it means the world to hear that you are enjoying the show as well. I am very excited to announce that this summer I will be hosting a nutrition seminar series. This is actually a project that I started after I became certified as a nutrition coach. I wanted to get a group of people together to discuss all aspects of human nutrition, and as a bonus, I did the whole thing outside by a pool, which was great. After the pandemic, I stopped hosting the series, but this year I've decided to bring it back. Each week we'll have a particular topic and an agenda. We'll have outlines that include references, and also meal plans, guest appearances, book giveaways, and more, all for free. For those of you who live in the Salt Lake City area, the seminars will be hosted every Tuesday at noon, starting on May 28th, and will run all the way until September 3rd. The seminar will be hosted outside, of course, at the beautiful Bowery Park in Daybreak, where I live. If you're available and in the area, we would absolutely love to see you there. If you are unable to attend, either that day and time does not work for you, or you don't live in the area, good news for you as well, we are going to put all the recordings and post them on YouTube, where you can submit listener questions in the comment section, which we can address in future seminars. I'm also including all of the seminar materials on our website, so you don't have to miss out on the content. My goal is to make a comprehensive yet simple understanding of nutrition so that anybody confused about how they should eat can create a framework for themselves based on their individual goals. As I said, if you're interested in participating, we'd love to have you. If you can't make it into the in-person seminar, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also our website at myboundlessbody.com/seminar to find all of the resources, videos, and a fun quiz. Either way, thank you as always for listening to Boundless Body Radio.